bought my Talbot 95 in 1981, and the first STD trip I did with it was to the Alps in 1982, a trip organised by Keith Richardson. John Dodd was on it, and a few others. 6 cars, I think, only went. We were the only saloon cars. So when we were driving across the Alps in snow, it was surprising how many people wanted to lift in the saloon car, and they all left their open tours behind. On that trip, I became friendly with Paul Davis. Now, Paul Davis had a Talbot 90 Brooklands replica, which he had recently built, and I believe that was one of the first trips he had done in that car. We did several trips in that. He used to race it a little bit at VSCC events, and on a good day he could beat an Austin 702, but that was about all he'd ever managed to achieve. But we found it was brilliant for long distance driving, and somehow or other he managed to get an entry in the Mille Miglia in 1984, and we drove it down to Italy, drove it 1,000 miles around Italy, and drove it home. And we did 3,000 miles in 9 days. And on the way home, incidentally, before we went, Paul had the brakes relined, and it's all set up, all new brake shoes all around. And on the way home, it had brakes, and the brakes were pretty poor. And we kept driving, of course, and when we got home, the drums came off, and all the lines were worn right out to the rivets. So it just shows how much of a good time we were having driving around in Norway. Most people make their brake shoes last 20 years, or didn't last 20 weeks. So on the way home, we said, what are we going to do next? And we said, well, it'd be good to drive around the world, wouldn't it? And that didn't happen. But in 1986, we saw an advert in Motorsport at the time. An Australian guy was advertising would people with vintage cars like to drive to Australia for part of their bicentennial event, which was 1988. So Paul and I discussed this, and we said, yes, let's drive to Australia. So we paid the deposit, put our name down, and it went on from there. We wanted to use a Talbot. Paul knew his Talbot inside out. I had my 95, which I knew quite well, and we wanted a car that we were conversant with. So we set about. The car needed to be a vintage car built before 1931. We said we'd like a Talbot 75. The 75 only came out in 1930. There weren't many genuine 1930 75s around. We couldn't find a genuine 1930 car that anybody would park. We phoned and spoke to all the owners we could find, and we actually ended up with this car, which, as everybody knows, is a complete bitz. It's not a genuine 1930 car, but most of it passes as 1930. It has the parrot shaft front brakes, which went out in perhaps 32. It has a 1930 engine. The engine is genuine 1930. It has the silent third gearbox. So, as far as the organisers were concerned, it was good enough to be a vintage car. We gathered the bits from John Dodd, various people, gearbox, back axle, they came from all over the place. We assembled the car. We had no body. I found some pictures of Bewley of a Talbot with an open tourer body, a style of which we liked. So we got together with Robin Wiggins, who was an STD member, and I went up to Robin Wiggins every day for about 6 weeks. Between us, we built the body, which is a loose copy of the one I'd seen in the Bewley Museum. So there we were, ready to drive to Australia. The rules changed quite a bit along the way, but finally the rules said cars must leave London on the 1st of January 88. They should get to Australia as close to Australia Day, which I think is the 28th of January, as they could. Well, obviously, nobody can drive from London to Australia in 28 days. But also, if they drove to south of the equator, they could drive to Australia and only cross 2 borders before getting to Sydney. If they crossed north of the equator to go to Australia, they would have to visit every mainland capital city, which is a hell of a trek around Australia. We didn't know how we were going to get there, but the organisers had anticipated that everybody would drive down to Singapore, or the majority of people would drive down to Singapore. But during those final 2 years, most of the Western world fell out with Iran. And it's very difficult to get to Singapore without going through Iran. So we got our schoolboy atlas out, sat down and looked at it, and we decided we could go across the Sahara, due south.
Yeah.
It was easy, it's just out till there. Now, could we do it or not? We didn't know. We found a guy who prepared Land Rovers to go all over the world. We consulted him, and he said, well, a Series 1 Land Rover will do this. Will your car go where a Series 1 Land Rover will go? Well, of course it wouldn't really, would it? But we said, well, it might do. So we decided to go across the Sahara. Other competitors, but I'll say more about this later, but in the end there were only 6 competitors. But at that time we thought there were 30 other entrants, or at least 30 other entrants. Most of the other competitors at that stage were saying they were going to cross the States and then ship from the States to Australia. Then they had to do the long route around Australia. Our route going down to Africa was potentially very short. There were a lot of dangers in it. It was going to be hard work, but it was a short route. Now, the guy we had consulted, he drew us up a list, drew up a detailed agenda. Every day we knew exactly where we were going to stop in the evening, and some days we only had to cover 20 miles, some days we had to do 300 miles. But as long as we could stick to that agenda, we would get to Mombasa on the 5th of February, catch a boat which left on the 7th, arrive in Fremantle or whatever it was. 10 days later, we would be in Sydney on the 10th of March. It was simple. All we had to do was follow that agenda. So, we've moved on. So I'm told that this is modern as a television. There's nothing up there blinding me, and if I do this, you don't get a shadow. But so we chose this route down through France the first day, night just outside Marseille, across to Algiers, across Algeria, to Tamanrasset in the middle of the Sahara there, down to Nigeria, and then we turned left, Cameroon Republic. It's just the Congo there. We call it Zaire in Uganda, and Kenya to Mombasa. So, ready?
Sorry.
No. There we go. 1st of January 1988. First disappointment. Only 6 cars. Those 2 Model A Ford. That's a Model A Ford. A flat-nosed Morris. 1440 Vauxhall. Lancia Lambda. Yeah, that's the other Model A Ford. And a Talbot somewhere. Right. And there we are. The car's never looked like that since. You know, actually, shone, ready to go. That's me there, just patting her on the nose, and Mr. Edwards and his son, who are in the Model A Ford. The car was absolutely stuck. It weighed 2 tons, fully loaded. We had 6 jerry cans in the back, which they had a code on them. The one with all white on always had water. The ones with some white on had water in the desert. The others, there were 2 on each running board, and that one carried petrol. That was our washing machine, which is a plastic bucket, chucked our dirty clothes in there, a drop of Tide or something, water, and the motion Made everything very great. Change of oil, GTX, and that was about it really. Oh, a thermos flask we took, that was very handy too. We had 35 days of dry food with us. So every evening we pulled in, we had a horrible little Primus type stove which ran on petrol. We managed to make that work, get hot water, put some of the dried food in the thing and add water, stir it up. Sometimes it was beef madras, sometimes it was chicken something. But, and we had a big tin of smash. You can't see the tin of smash there, but we'll feature later. We got very adept at living off dried food. And these are some of the other guys. These two are, these two look Australians in the lovely Lancia. Shame to take that car there with its lovely suspension. But I think they went southeast. I think they went southeast. A lot of them went down towards Iran and they somehow managed to ship round, but it took them absolutely ages to get the shipping and everything sorted out. We had every visa and every piece of paper we needed or were going to need in our hands before we left England. We spent a lot of time going to embassies and getting permits to pass through countries and to visit countries. Yes, please. That's Ford Model A. We were very cross because these guys lived just outside Perth. Lovely car, beautiful, covered in stickers. They had a lot of sponsorship. We'd been to Kodak to be able to get sponsorship, but the thing that really gored us, on the back they had a British Airways sticker. We had tried very hard to get money at British Airways, but they gave it all to the Australians.
James, would you mind standing slightly to the left,
sorry,
if possible? Yep. Thank you very much.
Yep. And again, that's the Model A Ford. Oh, sorry, that's the Morris. Morris. They're the guys from Hayling Island.
It's called Matilda.
He's got a roof rack with stuff on the roof, the spare bottles on the front. Don Saunders and Kathy Tidwell from America. They were going to drive back across the States, of course. They're just going back home. And they had Model A behind them. Of course, a lot of these people we never saw again after we only saw them this first. Yeah, there's the stickers on the back of the Ford. Okay. And this Vauxhall, they were from the south coast as well. A lovely, beautifully prepared little car, but we thought it would look a bit fragile. But a big trunk on the back, full of their vital belongings. All 6 cars got to Australia, so they were generally well prepared. Right. This is the end of day 2. First evening we caught a ferry from Portsmouth. All of us went to Portsmouth on New Year's Day 1988. There was only one ferry leaving the country, and that was from Portsmouth. So we all left Hyde Park, waved goodbye to one another, and we all rolled up in Portsmouth dockyard, waiting to catch the overnight ferry. We got off next morning at Caen, and we drove down to Marseille. This is Marseille the next morning, and again. And we crossed from Marseille to Algiers. Now, Algiers looked a bit like a lot of France, really. Drove on the left, that might be in back to front, and quite civilized to begin with. Okay, and nice tarmac roads, mountains in the distance, the Atlas Mountains, of course. So the first couple of days were quite leisurely driving. Go on, yep. We get closer to these mountains, and again, we crossed over the Atlas. As we crossed over the Atlas, 2 things happened. A, it becomes barren, and cold. We had actually fisherman's suit, all in completely waterproof fisherman's suits. Big zip up the front. We virtually wore them the whole rally. the tarmac road isn't such good tarmac. And these were, I think they were Germans here. They had a nice modern map, and they said, our map shows us tarmac all the way to Taman Rasset. Taman Rasset is the middle of the Sahara. Our map had a dotted red line showing it was tarmac in places, or it had been tarmac. So they assured us it was going to be tarmac all the way. You can see dust cloud in the background there. That's another vehicle driving on this funny surface, throwing up a cloud of dust. And this was probably the vehicle that we saw crossing there. Once we were south of the Atlas, almost you saw very few vehicles, but almost every vehicle we saw would stop and just pass the time of day or beg something. I think they all saw we were rich Westerners and wanted to beg something. So they obviously thought they were going to get something out of us, probably had some cigarettes, all in their headgear there. I'm conversing with that guy there, but notice in the back of the truck they've got a camel. Now, I don't know whether they were taking the camel somewhere because he needed to be elsewhere, or whether he was their insurance policy. We never did work that one out. There they are, getting back in with the camel. And oasis towns, where there is water, there's a town, and you can see here there's a throng of activity, wonderful electricity, and sandy roads. I think I was in Guardia. Now this is the road. This is the road. It was a dotted line on our map. German map. It was solid red line, tarmac all the way. Here we are. Horrible broken tarmac. And we learned, not quickly enough, we learned not to drive on it. The edges were so rough, they gave the car such a pounding, and we really suffered. That guy's got the idea. He's keeping away from the tarmac, he's just driving on the soft sand. There you go. Awful stuff. And soon enough, what's the funny noise out of the front brake? And the axle had deflected so much that the parent shaft brake, of course, it's a solid arm. The axle was deflected so much that the parent shaft had forced the keep off the end of the parent shaft, and the nuts had come off, and the plate there was just swinging about. So we put it all back together and said we must drive more sensibly. We didn't have that many spares with us. There we are with it, got the wheel off, sorted it out. In places, the sand has blown about over the years, and the tarmac disappeared altogether. We were heading due south. There was no. That's all it was. It's just one dotted line on the map. You follow the tracks where other people have been if you could see them. Otherwise, we have a compass in the car, and we want just following a southerly south heading. Okay. Here we are underneath the front of the car. You'll see we put extra rubber spring assisters between the chassis and the axle. Well, they didn't last long; they fell off. But they did a little bit of good for some time. That's a picture we're all very familiar with, isn't it, more or less? But look how it's covered in dust already. This is only a few days in. Again, another oasis town. I'm sorry, I don't remember all the names now. I have a jerry can at home, and I wrote on it at the time all the places we visited. So I should have brought it with me because it would have been amazing one. Again, where there's water, there's people. Here we are stood one morning, again in our flying suits, doing a selfie. Before they'd invented them, of course. 3-day-old bread, I remember. We'd bought that in Algiers, and it had gone hard as rock, but dipped in coffee. It was very nice. Again, now you can see we had 2 spare wheels, one on each side of the car. On the outside of each spare wheel, we strapped an extra spare tyre, so we actually had 8 tyres with us. We had these short running boards are actually aluminium sand ladders. We carried 4 of those. One is a running board on each side, and two on the back of the car each side as sort of a rear bumper. The jerry cans had fuel in them, and we needed to carry a full load of fuel. With the hood up, the door wouldn't open, and it was very difficult getting in and out of the car into the seat. But we do out the technique. Okay. And here we are one night camping under the stars. The stars are just phenomenal in the desert. It's very difficult to see. Little tent there. There's the car. The hood, we've undone it from the windscreen and just stood it up. So the hood is standing up, so we can get in the back. We can find our camping stove and all the things we needed, and the dry stuff mixed with water to make a meal. And here we are. Oh, I washed occasionally. Look, we took our trusty bucket, which we carried with us. I was just doing a few ablutions there. Jerry can with fuel, with petrol in it. Oh, sorry, with water in it, and our gear. There we are, ready for dinner. Well, as I was stirring the juice that night, this little guy appeared from nowhere and jumped up, climbed up there. Look, and he's licking the smash off my fork. Where he came from, goodness only knows. There we are again. We're not quite as clean now as we were at the start, but it gets worse. And again, the back of the car, we had a couple of lights that fed off the battery, which we hung about so we could see what we were doing at night. But in reality, we tried to stop an hour before dark, so we had the time to get the tent up and do most of this before it went dark. But it didn't happen, and a lot of times we were usually doing everything in the dark. Okay. And again, a bit more of that unmade road through the sand.
Quite smooth.
We were advised when we took, I think, only one jerry can full of water from the start from France. We were advised when we got to the desert, if we saw water, we should collect it. This guy, we'd stopped for fuel, and this guy said, I have water. So we went around the corner and topped up this jerry can with local water. He's got a pipe there. There's a tap somewhere he turned on. We had half a jerry can of water from him. So that was a standby, extra reserve. And again, some of these towns look as civilised, have tarmac roads, street lighting, better than we have at home. And that's what the locals wore in Saharan Africa at the time. The headgear, so they can wrap it around and keep the sand out of the eyes when there were sandstorms. The road now has opened out wide, whatever there is of the road. This is obviously the track to follow. It's going south. There's a barrel there with an arrow pointing up to heaven, and it says Tam. That's Tamanrasset. That's the road to Tamanrasset. But you can see here the road is corrugated, which is a phenomenon of suspension of cars, where vehicles they pound the sand, and it forms these ridges. And it's horrible things to drive over. At 20 miles an hour, it rattles the fillings over the teeth. But if you get up to 40 miles an hour, the car glides over the apexes of them, and it's a much better ride. But you need a lot of courage to put your foot down and go faster over it when you've already been shaken to death. We had a regular, usually a morning ritual. It was called taking the spade for a walk. Paul is just, in case you're going to ask, Paul is just returning from taking the spade for a walk. The Sahara isn't flat, and there's a lot of mountain ranges and gorges and valleys, and this is just some of the scenery. Now, not every car made it to Tamanrasset. In the past, they had failed along the way, and the locals had helped themselves to most of the useful parts. It was just a reminder to us just to look after our car, because there wouldn't be much left of it if we abandoned it for more than a few days. We had slept in tents. I think it was 9 days to Tamanrasset. Slept in the tent every night after we left Algiers. We were looking forward to getting to Tamanrasset. Allegedly, there was a hotel, and so we needn't put the tent up. We'd have a night in a bed. Somebody else would do the cooking for us, and we were going to have a day off. What's more, so we were delighted to be here. But when we arrived, the place was full of these four-wheel drive vehicles. And you see our little Talbot there, in between all these big four-wheel drive vehicles. And we learned when we got there, the Paris-Dakar rally of the Paris on the 1st of January, same day as we left. But these were the dropouts. The rally had moved on. These people had dropped out for one reason or another and were in Tamanrasset, in the middle of the Sahara, working out how they were going to get back to civilization. The hotel was full. When we got there, the hotel was full of these guys. We bribed a waiter to let us have his room. But when we got there, we wished we'd put the tent up. There was a tap, a sink with a tap with no water in it, and not much else. So this is the following day, servicing the car after 9 days driving. And here we are, like Bill and Ben in Tamanrasset. One of the foot dropouts from the Paris-Dakar was this Nissan four-wheel drive vehicle owned by a Dutchman called Hans, and he had blown a head gasket and his car wasn't going any further. He had been sponsored by DHL, and on the side of his car he had a big sticker, anything anywhere in the world in 24 hours. They couldn't get him a new head gasket to Tamanrasset. He had to drive to the border of Niger, and the head gasket would be in Niger. So he commissioned these guys in this truck again to take him to the border in Niger. And we spoke to the Arabs who were driving it, and we did a deal. Any loose change we had in our pocket when we got to the border, we would give to them if they would let us follow them. Now, I'm saying this because that part of the Sahara between Tamanrasset and Niger is very difficult to navigate. That is the part where Margaret Thatcher's son had been lost only a year or 18 months before. So we thought this was a real coup following this guy. The only trouble was his top speed was only about 30 miles an hour, and we were always in a cloud of his dust. And they stopped every 2 hours to pray to Allah. But apart from that, the plan was perfect. So here he is. They're stopping to pray to Allah or to make a cup of tea or some such thing. They were endlessly stopping. But while we were following them, we gave Hans, and Hans sat in his Nissan in the back of the truck. We gave Hans our camera. So here he is photographing us in our Talbot. Driving, we overtook him and drove round, and we had to do something because we were so bored going so slowly. And you can see the wind billowing the hood there. This is on early morning or late night. You can see the dust. We had our lights on. Everything was still working then. Stopping now to light a fire. Look, Hans getting out of his truck at the back. They carried wood with them to light a fire to have a brew up. Still bitterly cold. And you can actually see we had Lucas tyres. You can see our Lucas tyre treads. We'd actually driven in a circle round them as they stopped. But it was bitterly cold there. And again, we had our water in jerry cans, but the local people carried it in goat skins. Oh yeah, goat. Yeah, goat skins. Look, it's they've got a dead goat there. They've taken out the bits they didn't need, sewed up the whole water. The thing is, the water evaporates through the goat skin and keeps the remaining water cool, but it gives it a funny taste. We've seen a lot of hard, firm sand. We've been driving on hard, firm sand, but in a twinkling, it can change to this stuff, where the car just sinks out of sight in a few yards, not even hundreds of yards. And we learned to be able to tell the difference, to see from a distance the soft sand that wouldn't support the car. Sometimes you could deviate to left or right and drive around it, but there are other times where you could see no way around it, you just had to plough through it. This is one of those occasions where we ploughed through it. I'm putting sand ladders down, I've got the sand ladders there, putting them under the wheels, been digging 2 shovels. It was quite hard work. Flying jackets off, getting warm now. And you can see the tracks behind. Now we've driven through it, come through it, and I'm carrying the paraphernalia back to the car. One of the things we learned after the first time we got stuck, put the sand ladders under the wheels, drop the spades, okay, forward, off we go, push the car, 50 yards, Paul's disappears into the distance. I'll go back, can't find the sand ladders because they've been buried by the car, and they're in that rough sand there somewhere. Can you find them? So I soon learned to stick the spades in the sand alongside the sand ladder so I could go back and find the sand ladders. We bought a very expensive Nikon waterproof camera. The idea was if it didn't let water in, it wouldn't let sand in. So it would work forever. So we paid a lot of money for this Nikon camera. You saw that picture in the sand. That was the last picture it took. The next time we tried to take a picture, we took it out of the glove box and the thing was red hot. It had a short, so it had batteries in it. It had a short circuit inside and wouldn't work any longer. So we drove from southern Niger, Cameroon, Central African Republic without a camera. So unfortunately, there's no photographs till we get to the Central African Republic. This is Bangui. Now this is the second night we were going to stay in a hotel. We've done 9 nights to Tamanrasset. There's another 9 or 10 nights to Bangui. And this is the Sofitel. It's in back to front, but this is a Sofitel in Bangui. Central African Republic is a diamond country. And the French had built this hotel and ran some of the diamond mines. We were going to stop in there and have a good night's rest, and the next day again was going to be a day to service the car. When we were in Tamanrasset, because this is all before we had mobile phones and all modern communications, we were going to send a message back to England saying we'd at least arrived in the middle of Sahara. We went to the hotel reception. In those days it was telexes, and I gave the guy the message, paid him the money, American dollars of course, paid him the money, and off we went. We got here, we could phone from here, so it was really civilized. So we got there. First thing we went and stood on the shower for about half an hour each to wash out some of the dirt, and we rang home and they said, "Oh, what happened to Tamanrasset?" I said, "Well, we sent you a message 10 days ago." Well, we never received a telex, nothing ever came through. So the guy in Tamanrasset popped the money and didn't send the telex. And they were all ready to throw in the towel. And here we were, popped off again. We stayed in that hotel for 2 nights. From a hotel window, you could see the river and ferries going backwards and forwards. Across the other side there is Zaire, and we were going to cross over to go to Zaire the following day. When we came to cross, the ferry was on the far bank, so these 2 guys took me across in their canoe, and I did a deal with the ferryman to bring his ferry across to take the car into Zaire. When the ferry arrived, the ramp was too steep to drive the car forward, so we reversed it on with a lot of shouting and a lot of hard work. We actually had to push it in the end, I think. We came off the other side and it was a completely different world. We were in jungle straight away, just a narrow, rough track through the trees and virtually no passing places. Except when 2 lorries met, one would dive off the side, or they both half dived off the side into the jungle. There were several ferry crossings in Zoya. We probably made a dozen overall. Here the ferries on his way across. We drove on, gave him a few, usually nearly always $1, and off the other side. Here we are on the ferry. How they managed to keep such clean clothes, because we were the dirtiest people in Africa. Now this is horrible wet sand. I think it was a dry season when we were there. It was a dry season when we were there, but there were still almost daily rainstorms, really heavy rain. And this, what would be dry sand blown about on later in the day or early in the day, became a quagmire. And it was so deep that there were no cars in Zoya, only trucks and lorries. So where we had to follow wheel tracks, the width of our tracks was narrower than anything else. We found it very difficult. We had to keep the car with one wheel up or either wheel up and try and keep going. But there's a nice bit of road there. Look, on the hardest day in Zoya, we'll see it gets worse in a minute. On the hardest day, we were only scheduled to cover 9 or 10 miles, and we did just. We were all day in first and second gear. We couldn't get, well, it was just too rough. It was really hard work. This is a village we passed by, took the photograph as I was driving. Paul was driving. Bananas, we were still living off our rations, and a girl came up and offered us this big heap of plantains for 2 tea bags. We thought it was a wonderful deal. But we discovered these things go from being green and inedible to rotten in about 20 minutes. We had virtually none. They were virtually inedible. Again, another ferry crossing. It was about time I had a wash. You can see what my trousers look like there. And I took my shirt off and decided it was time to wash. It was a bit warmer now, so it didn't make much difference, but there you go. And the whitest body in Africa. Didn't take my socks off, look. Look at the shirt, look at the dust on the car. Look, we were plastered. And then we came down to Bangui. There's going to be a ferry here, isn't there? And a termite hill up there. And here we are at Bangui. Now the thing about Bangui, apart from being the motorised ferry being half submerged, the new house is only half built. There were hundreds of 40-gallon drums. They contained diesel, and they were being ferried across the river in canoes to support the local trucks. And there they are. I don't know which way they were going now, but there they are, waiting to go onto the trucks. Okay. So we got down to the riverside and said we needed to go across the other side. According to the book, there was a motorised ferry. We walked up the bank there, and there was a motorised ferry, but it was half submerged, and the Lister diesel engine was underwater. So we came back there and spoke to the guy. He said, well, I can get anything across this river. Yeah, your car, that's no problem. Yeah, bring it down tomorrow. We can't do it tonight. We're busy tonight. Bring it down tomorrow morning. So tomorrow morning we went down, and they put us on the ferry. So to go on the ferry, 2 canoes were brought up alongside the riverbank. A few concrete blocks, a couple of scaffold boards. Just drive on. It's easy, really. Okay. And there we are on the ferry. But they decided at the last minute those 2 canoes weren't enough, and they'd actually brought a third one along and put 3 canoes underneath the boards. Okay. Wrong order there, but there we are, balanced on 2 canoes that they decided it wasn't enough. But Paul was very, very sceptical about this. He said, what happens if we fall off and disappear into the river? I said, well, they'll pull us out and the sunshine will dry us out in due course and we'll go on from there. But So we have to do it. There is no alternative. There you go. This is the guy who organised it all. I think it was 80. I think it was 80 American dollars we paid for this crossing, which was ludicrous. Rip-off. Okay, we crossed over. The order isn't quite right of these slides. I'm sorry. We crossed over. The guy was due to have 80 American dollars. When we got to the other side, there was this fence barricading us from getting to the track. We said to the boss of the ferry, how do we get through this fence? And the guy was there saying, nobody's taking my fence there, you don't go through here, it's going to cost you lots of money. And the ferryman said, look, this is what we're going to do. Next one, please. This is what we're going to do. We're going to take the planks off the ferry. We're going to put them up the side of the jetty where the motorised ferry would have tied up years ago, and you're going to drive up the planks. That's quite easy, really. That's a 40-gallon drum, just so you can get an idea of how high it is. That's 2/3 of the way up, and the jetty is only 6 foot wide, and the car is 12 or 13 foot. So Paul tried to drive up there. The car wouldn't go up. He had to go back further, drive a bit faster. He got nearly to the top the second time, didn't quite get to the top. And he said, but if I get to the top, he said, I'm going to shoot off the other side before I can stop. So anyway, I said, come on, Paul, just do it. So, he did. This is him now having his third go. We got to the top, and the car was actually stuck across the width of the track. There was plinth walls on the side. And he said, well, we're going that way, we're facing that way, we're stuck. So the ferryman, he got 20 of his mates, they all came over, they all caught hold of a piece of the car, they picked it up and turned it through 90 degrees. Yeah, that one should have been in earlier. You can see the 40-gallon drums there. Paul is just about at the top. Across there, we needed to carry enough fuel to do 1,000 miles. We didn't think we'd be able to buy fuel at all in Zaire. That's why we had 9 jerry cans allocated to fuel for Zaire. We also had the standard Talbot tank, which is 16 gallons. We had a Series 2 Land Rover tank inside, which is another, whatever they are, 10 gallons or something, and 9 jerry cans. We had filled a lot in Bangui, thinking we were not going to be able to buy petrol. Wherever we went in Zaire, people heard our car coming. It was different sounds to anything they heard. So whenever we stopped, we were surrounded by people. In the country, we were camping every night. Even in the country, you think, this is a jungle. There's nobody in this jungle. You pull in, manage to get off the road, squeeze off the road, find someone, put the tent up. Before the car had been stopped 5 minutes, there'd be people stood around watching us. We came through this village here, and as soon as we stopped, just to have a look at it, we were surrounded by people. But one guy turned up and said, I have petrol. So we bought petrol. I think we paid £1 a litre in those days. We didn't buy many litres, but this is us buying petrol. Please. Eventually, we came to... Yeah. Got into the centre of Zaire, and the governor heard we were there. This is Kisangani, and he'd got this Jaguar Escape 150, I think. Yeah. And he'd been there 9 years. He'd never driven the car at all because there were no roads to drive it on. He was absolutely astounded that we'd driven there in himself. Yeah, we had 2 places where we bought petrol, and this guy here, he had a 40-gallon drum of it in his kitchen. He went in and bought the Red Bull full out and siphoned it into that 5-litre can and sold it to us for about, well, I think it was £1 a litre in those days. Only trucks in Zaire and narrow gauge railway. Here we're driving down these boards over the railway. You can see the big lumps of steel sticking up there. It was very hazardous, really. And over the other side, it was even worse, where there were no boards, because we had the rails to to try and keep off.
Well,
I think it was a Sunday afternoon. We were stuck in this deep sand. It just, the ruts were so deep, or the sand was so loose, it just banked up against the axle. We couldn't drive in it. We got down, stuck at the bottom of the hill. Guy came down the hill in the Mitsubishi and said, "Get out of the way, I need to be somewhere very quickly." We said, "Well, we can't go anywhere. The only way you're going anywhere is to tow us back up that hill." So after a lot of negotiation, he put the rope on and he in reverse pulled us up the hill. Now, Paul's turn to watch this time. We didn't see any crocodiles. I think the smell drew, frightened them off. The further we got into Zaire, the harder the roads became. And you can see the poor old car here has really had a hard time. One of the things I haven't mentioned is springs. We took a spare top leaf with us from the front springs. Well, we broke a top leaf in Algeria on that hard concrete, on that hard tarmac. When we got to Kisangani in the middle of Zaire, which was a few hundred miles before this, we had broken another top leaf. And we found a guy who took us to a local scrapyard, and we dived about amongst all the vehicles there. We discovered that one of the Nissan four-wheel drives had a top leaf that was very similar to ours. It was the same width, and crucially, it was the same length from the centre hole to one of the eyes. The other end of it, the centre hole to the eye, was 6 inches longer. And we bought a leaf and took it round the corner to a bloke with a gas set, and he cut the end off and put another circle on the end, circled the end, and we put that on. So one top leaf had a heavy Nissan leaf in it, one spring, and later on again we broke another top leaf, and we did the same thing again. We now knew what spring leaf we needed, and it ended up with two Nissan springs on the top leaf for the front springs. Here we have fallen down. These are ruts in the ground. We had fallen down a rut in the ground, and the front axle's on the ground, the wheel was spinning in mid-air. And the only way we could think to get out of it was to jack the car up, put the sand handers underneath, and drive us out. The headlights fell out on the rough ground. It was terrible, terrible. Poor old car. And you can see down the edge of the road here, there's big ditches. Well, in places the ditches cross the road. That's what causes the problems. But also there, we'd been following a white Land Rover. This is early one morning. We'd been following a white Land Rover for a few miles, but he was half a mile or so in front of us. And when we drove down here, he had driven into the ditch. Look, there's a Land Rover lying on its side there. He put a pair of wheels into the ditch and just dropped over on its side. We decided not to stop. There were plenty of people about. They could give him more help than we could. And some of the best roads in the world. Look, the guys on the bicycles have come down for a bit of fun. They're not going to get that through there, are they? Let's see how they do it. And you can see we had to be very, very careful not to bottom out again and again. And here, as I was saying here, this is sort of a ditch runs down here. There's another one there, and I got out and walked ahead to see how we had to drive. It might have been better to put one wheel on this edge and keep the other in the centre, how we were going to drive through that piece. We learned it was often better to stop and have a look before we drove into it. And further on down the road, there was this horrible, wet, muddy bog. We'd seen a lorry come up the hill, and he said, "You won't get that car through there." So we said, "Okay, we'll go and have a look." And here I am filling the ruts with bits of branch to try and level it out a bit. And we drove through it. Right, that was Zaire. We got out of Zaire and came into Uganda. Tarmac road. We could not believe it. Tarmac road. It was like we were back in heaven. And we were whooping along. I was driving probably 50, 60 miles an hour, and about 10 miles, the car just stopped. and stopped going. The engine was running. Wasn't driving. And we got out and looked, couldn't work out what the problem was, so we did the usual trip. We put the tent up and had supper. Thought we'll find out in the morning what's wrong with it. You'll see, we were stopped by the police at one stage. They said, your car is a mess. We said, well, it's your roads that have done it. That didn't carry much weight. And they were particularly disgruntled by the state of the headlamps. So we took our towels out of our kit and we wrapped towels around the headlamps so they couldn't see the innards were missing. Next morning, we discovered that possibly the half shaft was broken, and we got a local coming by to tow us to the nearest town in Uganda, Kasese, and he towed us down to this place, which was Equator Engineering. There were 6 guys there Sunday morning. 6 guys there. We jacked the car up, stripped out the back axle, and you can see various bits lying about there. And again, because we carried all the tools with us that we thought we needed. We put the car together after all between us, so we carried most of our tools. We said we put the car together once with these tools, we can do it again. They stripped the car out, the broken half shaft, and you can see the brake through there. Also in the background, you can see, I think you can see, oh yes, that's the back, the rear brake. The rear back plate for the rear brake with the rod in it there. You can see it's broken off. That shiny edge is the sharp edge of the brake plate that's broken off. Anyway, they had a big arc welder, didn't even have a grinder. They had a big arc welder. They made 3 little short strips of steel, or picked up 3 short bits of steel, welded them against the long piece of the shaft, dropped the short piece in, and then welded it round and round. Having first of all made a V, by blowing it away, turning the arc welder up full blast and blowing away a lot of the metal. So here's the guy. You can see all the safety equipment about to weld the half shaft. And it's being welded. The back plate's been patched, and that's a general picture of the car in Equator Engineering. Okay. So we were off again. They said you can get a new half shaft made in Kampala. It's only 400 miles up the road. So off we went, and we said, well, if it does 40 miles, it'll probably go on forever anyway. And it was a bit noisy, but we kept going. We discovered there was a war in Uganda at the time, a civil war, and it was very difficult to get petrol. In Zaire, we had fuel to cross Zaire. We thought Uganda was going to be easy. We got there, we went to a fuel station. We had 12 or 13 litres of fuel left. Don't forget, we probably bought 10 litres or so en route. We were right down to the virtues of the last gasp of petrol, considering what we'd done. And we went into a fuel station. The queues were a bit like they were a fortnight ago in England. And the problem was you couldn't buy fuel. You had to have a piece of paper to authorise you to buy fuel. To get that, you needed to go to somebody's office and pay them some more American dollars and get the form. So we went through all that palaver, got the form, got to the fuel station, allowed us to buy fuel, but of course we had to join the queue that was endless. And I think we queued for nearly 2 hours to get fuel. We filled up with fuel and off we were going now on this lovely tarmac road in Uganda. Uganda into Kenya. And you can see Zaire has made us quite filthy. We've tried washing several times and we changed our clothes. We got into Kenya. First day it had been hot. We'd given up shaving weeks ago. First day it had been hot. And I've got calamine lotion on my face. I've been sunburned that day. We've driven across Africa without really being hot. The tin of smash looking not quite as clean as it did. Yeah, we had a diary. I used to write a diary. We tried to, sometimes we wrote it while we were driving, but we used to write a diary every evening. And you see that's falling apart. In the Central African Republic, we had been stopped by soldiers everywhere in the Central African Republic, and several times we had to take everything out of the car. But we had 3 hiding places in the car, secret boxes that nobody ever found, which was quite a consolation. But one of the soldiers had everything out, and he said, what is this? Show me this. I said, it's potato. Potato. Took the top off and smashed potato powder, and he had a bayonet on his rifle, and he stirred the smash with his bayonet, and grunted and said, "Okay." But we were worried he hadn't won. This is the last night before we got to Mombasa. So the next picture might be a picture of Mombasa. Welcome to Mombasa. There we are.
Yes.
So we got to Mombasa on the 5th of February. We were a day early. We were a day ahead of schedule. So that schedule that Lawrence Woolhouse down in Portsmouth had given us was perfect. Some days along the line we've got a little bit behind. Some days we couldn't manage the 20 miles, we wrote 80. So on another day we managed to do 250 instead of 200. So we were in Mombasa a day ahead of schedule. But it had taken its toll. Now, Paul's father had a friend he'd been associated with in the past, Brian here, who lived in Mombasa, was married to this lady here, Margaret, and he had various children. And Brian came out and found us in Mombasa and said, you're coming back to stay with us, rest with us, and spend as much time here as you'd like. So we spent time with Brian and his daughter. What else did we discovered while we were there that Diane had been Miss Kenya the year before, and now we're in Mombasa. We had to go down to the shipping agent, put the car on the ship. When we got there, the guy said, "Oh, that ship isn't coming. It's not going to be here." So, okay, we need another car. Another ship to get us to Australia. The ship we had booked was going to go direct to Fremantle, quite a short route. He said, no. He says, not a ship going to do that. He said, there is a tramp steamer coming down, and he said he's doing all the ports down this east coast, and he's going down to Joburg, and you can tranship from there across to Fremantle. He said it'd be very quick. But at that time, there was apartheid in Africa, and the Africans wouldn't work on ships and vehicles that were going to South Africa. They had boycotted South Africa. He said, I can't show you a schedule. He said, it's not official, but I can assure you this ship will go down to South Africa and you can transit across to Australia. We didn't take that offer because we didn't want the car to be impounded somewhere in a port somewhere else in Africa. And give us trouble getting it out. The next best option was to put the car on a ferry and take it to Singapore and transship it then from Singapore back down to Fremantle, which is what we did. So we gave the car to the ship handlers, and we were holiday makers then. We went to the beach, and this is where we lived. Paul and I in this hut in Brian and Margaret's garden. We had probably 10 days there. Brian had his old Land Rover. He said, you make the Land Rover go. He said, you can drive it around on safari, go around some of the big game parts. So I got in there and worked out, made the Land Rover serviceable, and we went around some of the big game parks. Okay. Now, he's caught me by surprise. Paul poked the camera in through the window. I've got an iron in my hand. Don't think I've used one since. Certainly haven't used one before. I'm ironing my shirt, my one nearly clean shirt. The girls have decided to take us to a nightclub, so we were getting ready for a good night out. So here we are. Two good. I think our brother and two sisters and Paul and I went to a nightclub. You see, I almost look clean. Another thing I forgot is my cleanest pair of trousers. They weren't that good, were they? But that shirt was pretty good. I was pretty fit before we started this. I used to go out and run 10 miles in the morning. I was 11 stone when I left home. We'd sat in that car eating that wonderful food for 35 days. And when we got to Mombasa, when I got out of the car, my trousers wouldn't stay up. So I had to go to the market in Mombasa and buy a belt to keep my trousers up. So a nice new clean belt. While we were holiday making in Mombasa, we went around the town, and this is a crocodile, and he's bound up with electrical tape. He had unfortunately killed a boy in the river estuary only a week before, and they had caught him one morning when we were there, and he was destined to go to a zoo somewhere. So there I am, patting him on the nose. Look, right. Okay, so that was the easy bit. We came. I think it was 4 weeks certainly. We arrived on the 5th of February, and it was about the 16th of March before we picked up our car in Perth. So we were going to drive across the Nullarbor, down around the top of Adelaide, and across to Sydney. Okay. We put the car in a container in Mombasa. We knew that was our container because of the funny paintwork on the side. We had remarked on it before when the car went in there, and that was it coming off the container ship in Fremantle. Okay, she is. We're reunited with her. She's had 5 weeks. She's been all the way to Singapore and back. We've only been to Australia. We paid them. We paid the guys extra money to use steel straps to hold the car down. And what's it got? Just Hessian, bits of Hessian, look, with a twig through the middle, wound up to hold it tight. So that was another waste of money, wasn't it? But she didn't move, so she hadn't suffered any damage. This guy was an STD member, it was Bob Grantham. We advertised we were going to be in Australia to the STD, and Bob Grantham came and found us in Perth and welcomed us to Australia. Now, some of you Sunbeam experts will know what colour that is, but it was good to see a fellow STD owner. Now, Australia's all tarmac, just about all tarmac and straight roads and sunshine and kangaroos. In Perth, people said to us, they said, you can't travel at daytime across the Nullarbor, it's going to be 45 degrees, it's going to be far too hot. Travel at night. Next person you spoke to said, you can only travel during the day, if you travel at night, the kangaroos are suicidal and you'll have an accident, you'll hit a kangaroo. So we took heed of the device and we drove for 2 days and 2 nights without stopping. We only stopped to fill with fuel. The first 24 hours we did 1,000 miles. The second 24 hours we did 1,000 miles. Very boring. Anyway, we come to the Blue Hills, I suspect, just outside Sydney, and we put the tent up and we said we'll have 4 hours sleep. We slept for about 12 hours. It was very hot. We had to put the roof up to keep the sun off, and shows how old this is. A Kodak film box there, holding the rubber under the windscreen to let more air in under the windscreen. Beware of kangaroos. There was a centrepiece in the Nullarbor that didn't have tarmac, but it was a very short piece of road and it was beautifully graded anyway. So eventually we arrived at Sydney Opera House. We'd left London on the 1st of January in the pouring rain, and we got to Sydney, it was raining. Try again. There we are, outside the Opera House. It's wet everywhere. Clean clothes on, of course. And okay, go on again. It's probably one more. 2 more. Oh, one more. Yeah, there. She caught up with me. Never been allowed out since. There you go. That's it. So that's my excuse for having the tattooed Talbot in the club.